Now, going forward, okay, this is what Samkele Maseko was talking about now. No one really knows who is in charge. The DA is seeking legal opinion. But they'll probably resolve that in a matter of days. But between now and December, when they are going to this policy conference, is there a chance, or what are the options that the DA has to try and regroup and be seen to be united?
Well, I do think that the chances are quite limited at this stage, because you do have quite an overbearing personality in Helen Zille, who has very strong views and is very clear about the direction. She wrote that she regrets having used identity, promoted Maimane and others. She might be coming back to clean what she might perceive to have been a messy situation. So, in that particular situation, it will be uncomfortable for Maimane, it will be uncomfortable for others to exert influence when they realize that the locus of power is Helen Zille and probably some of the previous leaders who are trying to regroup, reclaim the party. Some will not put their names, but behind the scenes, their influence will be felt quite solidly.
You know, I spoke to, on Monday, two of the provincial chairpersons, Ngababanga from the Eastern Cape and Mwango from KZN. And both went keen on Helen Zille as the Federal Council chair. But they had to accept the fact that those who were there, the majority of them preferred Helen. And they were then arguing that in the same way, you know, the future direction of the Democratic Alliance will be determined by the people who will actually discuss it and resolve on it. And it doesn't necessarily mean, if I read between the lines, that suddenly the DA is going to take whatever direction that Helen Zille may prescribe for it.
Yeah, I don't think so. And I think she is overbearing, but I don't think she's overbearing to the extent that Somadoda thinks she's going to be overweening. In the sense that even if you think about her colonialism tweets, much of the party did in fact find them distasteful. It's just unfortunate that under Maimane's leadership, the way in which she was reined in was relatively clumsy. So I don't think she always simply has her way. There were instances, in other instances too, I don't think she always gets her way, even though she's a blustery character. So it seems as if she is. And I think it's true that they will go back to their policy conference, and their delegates to the conference will determine what the outlook of the party is. But, and here's the caveat, if their delegates go with no sound idea of who they are and what they want to be, particularly on policy issues, then they will remain in the morass irrespective of who the figureheads and the leaders are. Now, this is not only also, let's not be crude, it's not just about using race as a proxy for social transformation and so on. It's genuinely about what form, size, shape, and character does the state take. And once you determine the size, shape, form of the state, what kind of policies do you put in place? So, for example, take social welfare, just as an example, right? You don't need to racialize the question of who a welfare beneficiary is, because you've got certain thresholds which you've written into policy, and automatically the largest number of beneficiaries are black South Africans who are socioeconomically deprived. Now, there are other instances in which you can craft policy in the same way, but you will firstly have to address the macro question. Do we want privatization? Don't we want privatization? If we do, to what extent? What do we do with state-owned enterprises? To what degree do we privatize, unbundle, restructure, and so on? So those are the key macro questions you first have to answer. Then you can answer subsidiary questions about what you're going to do in municipalities and in provincial governments.
Okay.
So I actually think that Ibrahim is a bit wrong on this particular one. I'll tell you why. We already know who the power structure is in the Democratic Alliance right now. It's Helen Zille, as she calls herself, the toilet cleaner, and you've got the Institute of Race Relations, or really race divisions, if you think about it. So when we are going to the policy conference, we're going to see an expression of their political will, because the money is backing them. So what we've seen is that Gwen Gwenya, Gareth Van Otselen, Sihle Ngobese, all of these people who are in that nexus, which started calling for a change in leadership, because we mustn't forget the sequence of events that has led us to this particular point. This is what Herman Mashaba was talking about as he was resigning. That first you have the issue about Mmusi Maimane and the car, then you have the issue about Mmusi Maimane and the house. These are classic smear campaigns. Everyone knows this politics. Then as things accelerate, you get the Institute of Race Relations, where Helen Zille was now sitting in the midst of that institute to almost signal to all of the funders that I'm here for a little bit, this is where the attack will be coming from. They then say they want Alan Wind, then they make aggressive moves, they go onto all of the media platforms and they start denigrating Mmusi Maimane by saying he's a nice guy, he's tall, and I guess that makes him some kind of a good leader. And all of those stratagems were to diminish his capacity as a strategist, as a man of integrity, and as a leader. And then you fast forward to where we are now, where you've now got Helen at the helm, and now we're going into a situation where the people who could challenge Helen have all been marginalized. I think it's very clear that Mmusi is not going to have a long time within the party, because there have been contradictions from Mmusi's side. Standing next to Herman was one of those contradictions. But more than that, his statement that one SA for all cannot happen within the Democratic Alliance, that basically was an exit statement. If you contrast with Athol Trollip, who said, I still believe in the Democratic Alliance, those resignations were actually quite different in their shape and form. One man said, I still believe I'm going to contest inside. The other man said, I don't believe anymore. I thought this was a thing. This is exactly what Herman Mashaba said as well. Herman Mashaba said, I'm not a career politician. Mmusi Maimane got me here. I believed in his vision of one SA for all and defeating the ANC. That's not going to happen anymore. I'm leaving. Mmusi Maimane says, well, I believed in defeating the ANC. I believed in one SA for all. I don't think it happens here. Even if he says he's going back to Parliament, I don't really think that there's going to be any real leadership that's going to come from him. Also, if I was a DA member, why would I take leadership from a guy who just told me he doesn't believe that we can deliver the goods?
So both of you are itching to say something, yeah?
For me, I think one of the biggest challenges we have in South Africa is our discomfort with the fact that identity is a dominant factor. But it doesn't come beating drums. It manifests itself. If you were to listen, coming from another country, to AfriForum, you would say, they understand the Constitution, they have policy positions and so forth. You know for a fact that behind that, there is an identity question. Because we're so uncomfortable with the identity issues, it's such that we begin to put every other thing in a more nuanced fashion. But you know that between 8 and 5 people talk more complex situations, policies, and when they retreat into their spaces, some of these things, it ought not to be like that. But the more we deny it, the more it has a longer shelf life. We ought to confront it. Hegemonic power structure in any neo-colonial situation, at the core, it has the identity. That's the national question. Until you deal with those particular issues, it may come in form of very complex policies. That's why I was saying, is classic liberalism, in whatever form you articulate it, well suited to deal with the group experiences which were there, when it is focusing on individuals and opportunities. So to me, that is the manifestation that we see now.
We do, and actually Jamie agrees with me. What he's saying, in effect, is that Mmusi undermined himself because of his weak leadership, not necessarily because of the strength, conspiratorial or otherwise, of places like the Institute of Race Relations and so on. I think we ascribe far too much power and influence to them. That's not to say they're not uninfluential. Of course they are. But I'm not sure that they are determinant to the way in which we ascribe agency to them, right? So much of this happened because Mmusi's own weak leadership. And let me give you a couple examples. When there was debates about whether, remember this secret ballot debate in Parliament? In some local councils they were allowed to, they let some of their members vote on a secret ballot. In other instances, no. Then when he had to deal with Diane Kohler-Barnard, he wasn't quite sure how he's going to deal with it and how he's going to apply the internal rules of the ANC, of the DA. Same was true with Helen Zille's colonialism tweets. wasn't quite sure where the fine balance lies between losing popular support and protecting the rights of an individual to freely express themselves. So all that kind of weakness, all that kind of prevarication, you take it a conceptual level higher on policy, on ideology, on the politics of the DA, you didn't get the sense that this guy knew what he was talking about. Now, it's true that in South Africa, identity does manifest itself in different ways. The question you now have to ask is, do you express the identity politics in their old apartheid way of own affairs and good neighborliness, and one gets a sense that there is a portion of the DA which actually wants that kind of what they call consociational politics. Look after your own, we'll come together when it comes to questions of public authority. But other than that, we're on our own. Now, I think Zille and Maimane sing from the same hymn sheet when they think that actually we don't want that kind of consociationalism. We actually want a cosmopolitan approach to the way in which we address the identity questions, whether through policy or otherwise. But I think that's the two clashes which now emerge. And I think the one that will emerge stronger is the cosmopolitan idea of the South African and how benefit is spread across, but it will be under the leadership of someone who most South Africans may not like. That's just going to have to be tough love. We're going to have to accept it. That sometimes the narrow identities don't matter when you think about who the leadership actually is.
But I mean, I want to go to another question. What does, if the DA does indeed implode, or continues to implode, as many people say is what is going to happen, what does that mean for the body politic? What does it mean in particular particularly for the ANC and the EFF?
Well, the first tragic thing is that you see weaknesses right across from the ANC, DA, and EFF going to its conference. You might begin to see some contradictions there spilling into the surface, and many other parties. So the tragedy here is the whole body politic is experiencing an institutional crisis and a legitimacy crisis, as well as a directional policy issue, not grasping, and also a leadership crisis to some degree. So the weakening of the DA is by default going to give ANC more breathing space. Remember that ANC is more adept over decades dealing with contradictions, embarrassments, and everything. It almost has an inbuilt shock absorption system. Unlike the other parties, they have gone through crises, they have gone through divisions, and somehow they limp forward. Other parties, they may not have the ability to recover in the same way. With the DA, my assumption here is that you may have some of the people, if they keep being emasculated, breaking away, forming something, which may then further reduce the DA. The question is whether it will remain a major opposition party when your EFF and maybe another breakaway group might be contesting for that. So that is the space. That you have a weaker opposition is also tragic, because for a democracy, for oversight and everything else, you need a strong, opposition party to do the oversight, to check the balance of forces and so forth. So that is the scenario that I'm looking at.
But I mean, in the main, the DA's contribution was oversight, but also lawfare. But it was nowhere near, dislodging the ANC.
So, look, I actually think that they will continue to provide that oversight. They will continue to provide the legal warfare. I think they will stabilize. I don't think they'll implode. Helen Zille is an experienced politician. They still have experienced politicians in the organization. It will turn into a Labour party, so to speak, is what we're seeing in the UK. A decline, but then a stabilization at a certain point. And then they'll identify, maybe it'll be Steenhuisen. He's actually one of the stronger people within the party who can maintain and has a forward-looking trajectory in terms of his political career. I don't think what they'll do, though, is grow. Because in order to grow, they will have to go onto campuses. They'll have to attract young people, and they're not going to be able to do that under Zille.
Quick last word, Ibrahim Fakir.
I think we agree. I don't think they'll implode. I think they'll continue to limp along, at least for the short term. But like the ANC, after every conference, after every crisis, the divisions will get wider and wider. But because the ANC is so big and so unwieldy, they're able to absorb it in some way. They, unfortunately, in the long term won't. But I think Jamie's right. They will stabilize at some point. But I do think that there is space for them to grow. They simply need to be consistent about who they are. And secondly, they need to get away from the PR and the spin and be a bit more honest, because there is a degree of appetite and a pedigree for honest politics.
Special thanks to Ibrahim Fakir, Somadoda Fikeni and Mighty Jamie for being so generous with their time and, of course, for their insights.